It's the West Tigers podcast, episode number 88, Eddie Otto game day. Big match tonight against the Rabbitohs. And last time we played Rabbitohs, really frustrating game, but I can kind of foresee a little bit like last year where they had the measure of us in the first game we played. I think it'll be a bit closer in this second game.
That's an optimistic start to the podcast, Joel. We did win last week. Maybe that's got you fired up. I'm not quite as optimistic, but always hopeful.
Always hopeful. Well, that is a good mindset to be in, because once you lose hope, then you probably should give up. But I don't think either of us have been there. I think we might have been close a few times. It has been a big week. There's been a lot of West Tigers talk in the media. Shall we, before we go on to the main topics that have been discussed, go back to that Manly game? After about 60 minutes, I'm sitting there thinking this is another disappointing performance. A couple of good little signs through the first hour of the game. I thought AJ Katoa was good. I thought a couple of the forwards were okay. And then it all just sort of clicked, and you had that feeling. I don't know about you, but I had that feeling that with 10 minutes to go, this was pretty doable. The way of the flow of the game was going, especially given we actually finally had some ball.
Well, it was a strange sort of game, Joel. I think the penalty count again was 8-1 against us. So thank you, Henry Perenara, who never seems to be on our side. I think we had 10 or 12 less sets than Manly. We conceded a lot of soft tries throughout the game, so it wasn't a world-beating performance. But Joel, I did think they showed character, because for a side that's sort of fairly well out of the 8 at the moment, there was 2 or 3 occasions where we could have turned it up. And I was like you, not with 10 minutes to go, but once Nofaluma scored that try with about 7 minutes to go and we got within 4, I thought we've got all the momentum here. We've Manly going to have to defend, for 5 or 10 minutes in a row. And that was a really well executed last try, wasn't it? Luke Brooks putting the kick on a dime and Adam Doueihi going up and grabbing it. So, yeah, it was exciting, because I think the players, fans, coaches, everyone needed a bit of a lift after the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I must say, David Nofaluma, big game from Nofaluma. He did really, really well. I think the thing with the match that does stand out to me is that obviously there was a couple of movements around. Maybe if you'd kept Moses Mbai in the centres, that try might not have happened at the end. And maybe Doueihi. I still think Doueihi at 5'8" is probably the long-term solution. But I thought Luke Brooks was better. Benji was sort of typical, sort of started off all right, but kind of faded as the game went on. But it was a weird game, wasn't it? Just all round, it was odd.
Sort of game that you probably get between two sides at the back end of the year who are, struggling. Manly have been really poor defensively for 6 or 8 weeks, but, a bit like us, when they get the momentum going, they've got a lot of points in them. So they were all over us in that first half. We didn't have much ball. But, yeah, like you said, I thought the mix looked a little bit better. Maybe that's deceptive, coming up against a side like Manly who's not strong defensively. But, I thought Doueihi was strong in the centres. Moses had his moments. I think he scored a try. He set one up, and he had 2 line break assists as well. So even though he only ran for about 70 metres, he was better in terms of his involvements. And, Luke Brooks, couple of try assists, which is good, because he's been very lean on those this year.
Yeah, definitely.
And just on David Nofaluma, Joel, I think he's too clear on top of the table for leading try scorer. I can't remember the last time we've had a leading try scorer. I remember Joel Kane was leading point scorer, I think, in 2000. But, that would be a pretty mighty achievement on the end of our backline, which hasn't been full of superstars. I don't know if it'll result in a blue jersey. Probably not. But you'd have to say he's in way better form than Blake Ferguson's been this year.
Yeah, exactly. And you can compare apples to apples, because Ferguson plays on the same wing as Nofaluma. So for there to be such a large discrepancy between the two is quite amazing. Probably given especially that Blake Ferguson's probably on twice as much money as Nofaluma.
And it's not like try scoring's been the only part of his game. I haven't got the stats in front of me, but he regularly is our leading meter eater. And that's including the forwards. So I think defensively his errors have been less this year as the season's gone on. He hasn't been making those sort of errors early in tackle counts. Occasionally you get one, but I think, he's making a case to be our player of the season. I thought Harry Grant had it sort of locked down, but he had a few weeks out with injury, and Noffa would certainly be a popular choice.
Yeah, I can very much see that. It's probably a 2-horse race. You'd probably say at this stage. Harry Grant did win. Probably a bit surprised that Jacob Little came on so late. The way that rotation worked, but the situation where Jacob went to hooker, obviously, and Harry Grant was still on the field in that last 15 minutes. Thought we looked really slick. Just that link man that Harry Grant proved to be, floating around sort of in that lock position.
Well, he just strikes me as a winner, Joel. Harry Grant. He's just a competitor, and you just want him on the field. I don't want to compare him to Cameron Smith, but it's like Cameron Smith. You sort of move him to halfback, and he still finds a way to, marshal a team around or get involved in the game. And even that last kick, Joel, that Dewey was on the end of, Grant was the one sort of backing up close behind. And that's unusual for a hooker to be chasing through a kick. But, I think the more minutes he's on the field, the better. I don't care if it's halfback, lock, wherever, because he's a competitor.
All right, let's leave it there. Suffice to say, it wasn't our greatest performance. It was a really exciting finish, and we're really pleased to get the 2 points. But there's probably that it was one of those, as I say, it was one of those sort of odd games. I don't know if it's going to show us too much about where West Tigers are going to be in 2021, etc. But I just think that at least if we end the year, because I think, if you go back 3 or 4 weeks, Eddie, we were both frustrated because it looked like players weren't moving on. There wasn't going to be a turnover in the roster, and things were looking bleak. But I think we've seen that starting to happen, and a few good performances to end the year would probably be the optimal sort of way to do it. So it was really good from that perspective to get the win over Manly, even though it probably will be for naught. Are we going to make the final 8, Eddie, this year, 2020?
Well, they just love doing this to us, don't they, Joel? Like, I'd started to relax, and then I saw something on the forum with this, wild equation of how we can make the 8. It's not as wild as you think. If we beat South Sydney on Thursday, and then I think the Warriors beat Cronulla, I think we go within 2 points of Cronulla, who are in a bit of free fall at the moment. But, we've seen it all before, Joel. Our run home's not good. That performance on Saturday night, I don't think is good enough to beat South, but I think it was just much needed because the club is under attack at the moment from a few sectors, and that didn't stop during the week despite the win, Joel.
Yeah, exactly. And I would just say in regards to all of that, often we've had a weekend where all the results have gone our way. You do start to think, and then the next weekend, everything goes against us, including the Tigers losing. So let's just go 1 week at a time. Stage.
We're back in ninth, Joel. We're comfortable there. I know that.
Exactly. All right, let's get on to the topic that did generate a lot of headlines, probably a lot more headlines than it probably was worth. What was your take on the Russell Packer, Josh Reynolds halftime departure at Brookvale Oval?
Yeah, I had to have a bit of a think about this one because, like you said, if your team's won 4 or 5 in a row and this happens, it probably doesn't even get reported. And the players in the dressing room, they didn't even know about it. You don't have to be there. But, Joel, it's all about context for me and timing. And these guys are 2 senior players. They've been around for a long time. They're of high character as far as we know, or they're smart guys, at least. I know Russell Packer's had his off-field incidents in the past, but surely those guys, if they would have been better off either not going at all, you probably don't get the headline, or at least come up with an excuse, make something up, say someone's sick. But to say it was too cold and to leave at half time, for me, that leaves a really, really sour taste in my mouth, at least. And I think, judging by a lot of fans' reaction, they thought it was really poor. And I just think, as senior guys, they must have known, Joel, at half time that if they get caught or something, that this is not going to be a good look, given the fact we're already in the headlines and those guys are in the headlines for underperforming and being out of the team.
Yeah, I think that it's been an interesting week to listen to the debate. It's one of those topics, and quite often with West Tigers things, a lot of the topics that are discussed on the forum aren't really 50-50. Generally, you've got a flow of 80-20, something like that. But this was a real 50-50. So, on one side, you had the camp that was saying, well, Josh Reynolds didn't even have to be there, and Russell wasn't going to play. He filled his contractual obligation by doing the warm-up. The other side of the coin was exactly, well, pretty much like what you're saying, that they didn't do themselves any favours. They should have stayed. They should have been more professional. I think the thing for me is that I can obviously see both sides of the argument. The issue to me is, did you ever see, I'm going to sidetrack a little bit, did you ever see that movie, Nicolas Cage movie, The Weatherman? Anyway,
No.
It was a good movie. You know what Nicolas Cage is like. He's definitely, a very unusual actor. But anyway, he gets a divorce because he forgot to get the tartar sauce. So he went out to dinner. His wife told him to get the tartar sauce, and it was just a little glimpse into what was wrong with their marriage. It was the final straw, And I'm not disappointed. I'm disappointed with Russell and Josh because they didn't want to be there. That is the ultimate thing. If you are a loyal club man, if you love the club, if you love your teammates, you want to be there. You want to support them. Come rain, hail, or shine. And that's what I'm disappointed at. We can talk about the contractual obligations or not contract. Didn't need to be there, that type of thing. It's just a shame that they didn't want to be there, and that says a lot. Because if we did lose the game, you'd want to go in the sheds after the game and pat your teammates on the back and console them or celebrate with them. Because you would have been invited in and been part of the celebration. So I think that's my point.
Well, and even the scoreboard, Joel, it looks bad because we're not getting flogged, but we're well down at half time. And I've got to say, how would they have felt driving home knowing that we'd won in the last minute? They'd probably feel like mugs because they would have been seen in the warm up. Packer had to warm up, and I don't know, Joel. I've been involved in a much lesser level of sport, playing sort of first grade cricket, and if you were 12th or 13th or 14th man, you sort of expected, it goes without saying, it's just the right thing to do to stick around and watch your team play. And coming up with an excuse that it's too cold, it just seems out of character for me for Josh Reynolds. And it speaks to the fact that all is not well, because I don't think those guys would ordinarily leave at half time because it's cold. I think it's obviously, I don't know if it's the complete breakdown with Michael Maguire or they've had a recent run in, but it comes off the back of that, that players meeting last week that was leaked. And, I just think it's really bad timing for both of those guys who are on contract next year, but do we want them? I don't know.
No, well, I think the thing that you've got to think of is that if Michael Maguire had come along instead of Ivan Cleary, if Michael got the job straight off, would we have Josh Reynolds and Russell Packer here if Madge? They're Ivan signings. They're not Russell type players. And I've got to say, both of those guys have a target painted on them. They're a little bit like Willie Mason. There's a few guys in the game that they can't walk through a crowd without being spotted. They've got sort of targets painted on them because of who they are. And I don't think either of them really, as much as I respect some of the things that Josh has done for the team and Russell in his first year, I don't see either of them as really being West Tigers players, especially Josh. I still see him as being a bulldog.
It's still surprising though, because every interview I've seen with him and every report from players is that he's a really good team guy, and he's had a rotten run with injury in form and being out of favour with coaches. So I don't know whether he just sort of reached the end of his tether or it was a snap decision, but I just think, I don't know. I just think it's a bad look, and I think they're going to struggle to get back in the team this year. And I saw Madge, I think he was interviewed today, and he was really diplomatic, which he has to be, because he knows these guys are on big money next year, and they're not just going to say, oh, right, we'll go play in England for 300 grand. They're going to want their money and they're going to stay. So he can't have a toxic environment where the coach is not speaking to these two players. So in a way, he's sort of, I'm sure deep down he's thinking, geez, I wish I could get rid of these two guys. Not necessarily because they're bad character, but because they're underperforming and they're overpaid. But it just looks like a fine line now that Madge has got to work, because, it looks like they'll both be here next season. I don't know if they've sort of got the shits that they've been shopped around for the last couple of months, but what do they expect, Joel? It's sort of, huge money and not much performances, and that's professional rugby league these days. So yeah, I was surprised. I was sort of yeah, I'd be surprised if it. I know it's not a hard and fast rule, but I just don't think it passes the pub test for fans. I think they'd be off it.
Yeah, exactly. I think that Russell, I mean, the other issue that seems to have nobody has discussed whatsoever, and I know that there probably was a component of it being an excuse, but he's got arthritis in his feet. How are you ever going to be able to play top-notch football week in, week out in 2021 if you can't sit at Brookvale? Because, and it wasn't even, it was a fairly mild night, to be fair and frank. You know, you can't even sit there and watch 40 minutes of football because you're in so much pain from the cold. I don't see him being able to make any contribution. And I think we now know more about the injuries that he's carrying, which I think is what is affecting his lateral movement so badly, because I don't have much of an issue. I mean, obviously Russell's stats have been pretty bad, but my biggest gripe with what we've seen of Russell this year has been his lateral defence. His lateral movement in defence has been shocking.
No, you're right. And we don't know what the pain and the stuff they go through to put themselves on the field. And I suppose once they are on the field, Joel, they're fair game. So that's the unfortunate thing. But yeah, Russell Packer, I think, he's going to struggle to get back in. But Josh Reynolds, who knows? I mean, next year there's no Benji Marshall, and maybe imagine him will patch up and he'll get on. But yeah, wait and see.
Yeah, I can't see either of them being here in 2021. I mean, maybe Russell, but I think Josh is heading overseas, and I don't know. Maybe there's a medical retirement for Big Russell. Let's keep those fingers crossed. That would be.
I was going to say that. I thought you were making a case there, Joel, for having medically retired. I mean, not the worst thing in the world. Ben Madalino ended up getting his money, didn't he? And if you can't perform at full freight. I know there was rumours about Josh Dugan earlier in the year, and he didn't know if he could perform at that. But just one other thing, I saw one thing that ticked me off a little bit. The club put out Brooks and Garner on Monday to not necessarily to talk about this, but they know the press are going to ask. That was the first 3 or 4 or 5 questions. And it's probably a bit harsh of me, but I just get annoyed by Luke Brooks. He just still sounds like an 18, 19-year-old in front of the cameras, and he said, I'm fully behind both those players and they did nothing wrong. And people say, he's defending his mate. And of course you would, but wouldn't, better leadership, Joel, to, like if it was going to be a Paul Gallen or something, he would have called them out. He would have said, look, this is not good enough to beat this club. We stay and we stick together. And if you're not in the team, you sit and watch the 80 minutes. And I've pulled him aside. And I know Brooks is 25 and whatnot, but I just thought, geez, it was really livid. I just think we're missing leadership in the club, off the field and on the field, and I felt a bit sorry for those players in that situation because they're probably going to say that, but I'd like to have a strong leader and just say that it's not good enough.
Yeah, and a little bit comes back to just being ahead of the curve a little bit more when it comes to the media for West Tigers, without getting on a whole different tangent, but that's where your Roosters are lucky with someone like Boyd Cordner, who's the captain of the club. He'd be the guy that they put up for the interview on Monday to discuss it. Or conversely, in the past, it would have been Paul Gallen at Cronulla. You can name a few other examples of that. Why you would put up Luke Brooks, who's struggling with his own stuff and isn't a quote unquote a leader of the club. The captain should have been up there speaking. There should have been 2 senior players, but as you say, we seem to be devoid of that sort of leadership just at the moment. And I think once again, what irked me about it was that Lee Hadjipantalis came out. He was really strong about it. Madge was a bit wishy-washy about it, and then Luke Brooks was the complete opposite. So there wasn't a unified voice at all. They weren't controlling the message at all.
That leaves us an easy target, Joel. And I think, Lee, he had his say there. It might be tricky with the bubble this year and how it works, but I would have preferred that to be out in front of the cameras on a Monday, or Justin to be out in front himself and then telling the players, like you said, right, this is the message, it's not good enough. And if you get interviewed or asked, you've got to toe our line. That's it. We're all on the same page, but it leaves you to think that it's sort of made up as it goes, and they were just thrown out there because they were on the rotation that day. So I don't know. I don't know if you're going to talk about Declan's article. Are you going to talk about that, or I just wanted to mention the just the Daily Telegraph. I mean, they just have got it in for us, and we give them reasons, but I think that's something that's either got to be repaired or looked at, because they are just, there's 6 or 7 teams below us, Joel, that for me have got better rosters who are going even worse. Like, look at Manly. I mean, they've lost 6 or 7 in a row. They were one of the top 4 teams at the start of the year. And then you've got Broncos, who are a disgrace. And, even the Cowboys and the Dragons probably got better rosters than us. But they seem like, they're vultures for us. And I just don't know if we stand up or we give them the messages that, can make them back off a little bit.
Yeah. I think that, there's a few points there to make. I think that the club really needs to understand that these guys aren't their friends. You've got to have a good working relationship with these guys, but they're not your mates. And I've known that because I've worked in the journalistic field for many years, and I worked in the car field, where you would be going to car launches and driving new cars, and you'd have PR people that would arrange it all, and you'd get on really well with the PR people. But then when push comes to shove, you have to be honest about the product as well. So it's a fine line. You need to have a good working, respectful arrangement. You don't have to be mates and best friends about it, but I think we could definitely play the game a little bit better, or a lot better in regards to that. Realistically, there's a lot that could be done to better foster those relationships. I think that my personal feeling about it is that the club is just throwing fuel on the fire, because I think the Telegraph has said, we're not going. There was that falling out a number of years ago. We're not going to cover the West Tigers stuff. We're not going to be positive because you're not giving us any stories. So what the club does is just feed stories to the Sydney Morning Herald, which just makes the situation even worse. And as I said on the podcast about a month ago, the Daily Telegraph is so much more important to West Tigers than Sydney Morning Herald. Our core audience, our people, don't read the Sydney Morning Herald. No disrespect. We're a working class sort of organisation. We should be in the Telegraph. We should be fostering that relationship as much as we can. The third point is that you have to understand West Tigers are clickbait. You put up any article about West Tigers and people will go there because we have got the most amount of fans. We've got more, I'm sure the Dragons and the Sharks don't get the clicks. West Tigers probably get 3 times as many clicks. So there's a thought within those offices, well, let's write a story about West Tigers. And finally, there's a difference between news stories and editorial. And a lot of the time, people don't seem to understand that what they're reading is an editorial. It's not a news piece. It might be masqueraded as a news piece, but once you get in there and you read it, and you can really understand that it's actually journalist opinion, it's not actually a news story of a who, what, when, and where. So take it all with a grain of salt and go through it, each article, and think to yourself, well, where's the angle on this? What is this journalist saying? Is this his opinion, or is this actual facts that he's quoting?
Yeah, well, you're right, you're spot on, but yeah, it just seems like there's a guy like Greg Alexander, for example. I think he's on the Penrith board, and he's sort of part of that Fox. So if there's ever a drama at Penrith, he can always sort of set them straight, whereas West Tigers, they keep calling Benny Elias, full respect to Benny Elias, but he's not a West Tigers legend. And they go to Benny and they go to Blocker. And, I don't know if those guys know anything about what's going on in between the walls. And that's their headline. I'd prefer them to go to a Scott Prince or go to a Scandalis or someone who was actually part of a premiership winning West Tigers team. But as an old, I don't know, I don't want to bring up old Balmain and West, but old West Magpies fans must get annoyed all the time, Joel, when every single article is about, West Tigers legend Benny Elias says this and that, and it's the same old crap. But like you said, maybe we need someone to foster a relationship there, or get themselves on those shows and create or show us, some of the good things the clubs are doing, or explain things up front. Because I saw Paul Crawley, who writes for the Telegraph, and Declan spoke about this in his article.
Yeah,
he was talking about one night, and I think it might have been on back-to-back nights. One night he was talking about, poor Russell Packer and Josh Reynolds. They've been hung out to dry by this club. They've been, put on the open market, and now they've been, they've left at half time, and the Lee and Justin have had a go at them. It's player welfare's bad there. But then the next night he comes on and says, well, West Tigers have been mediocre for 8 years, and it's because they overpay the players and they're not performing. So then it's just like, which one is it? You know what I mean?
Mm. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And it's all clickbait, and I agree about the. I think that with Benny Elias is not a West Tigers legend, even though I'm from the Balmain side, and Benny was one of my favourite players. Great memories of watching Benny play, but he's not a West Tigers legend. He was on the board, but he never played for West Tigers. He retired 6 years before West Tigers even existed. Gary Jack, same. I mean, full respect to Gary Jack, and I agree with Gary Jack's call for an alternate jersey that's an orange alternate jersey, but a lot of that's just taste. It's got nothing to do with Balmain. Steve Roach, it's just the same, exactly the same. Full respect for him for what he did for Balmain, but come on, you stop going to these dialer quotes and masquerading them as people that have actually contributed something to West Tigers. But none of those guys did. If I wanted to be really upset a few people, that why they go to the Balmain Stars instead of the West Stars?
Go on. No.
There were no West Stars.
Cut.
Let's just get that old Balmain West thing going.
Yeah.
No, you know what? Everybody knows that I'm joking, but it's true. They've got to stop calling the Balmain greats the West Tigers greats and going to them for quotes. I think it's.
I'd rather them go to even like a Darren Senna or a Jerry Mesher. You know what I mean? They were West Tigers, not legends, but they were clubmen. You know what I mean? And it's just annoying. I don't even bother I do read it, but I sort of think Benny's flying off the handle again, and he's probably got no idea what's going on in the club.
Yeah, I think the thing is too. The bigger message is that if West Tigers controlled the narrative. Look, it costs the club nothing to put out a statement. The club could have put out a statement on Monday morning saying this is where things stand. Russell and Josh left the game early. They didn't break any rules. However, we're disappointed that they weren't there for the game. We're talking to them today, and moving forward from this point on, this is going to be the standard of the club. This is every West Tigers player has been told that. If they're at a game, they need to stay till the end. That type of thing. That's what I'm talking about. And that would have taken half an hour to put that out. And that's what's controlling the narrative. That's what's stopping the cycle before it continues to just escalate like what we saw this week.
Well, you can guarantee tomorrow night there'll be a few cameras on the bench, won't there?
Yeah.
I don't think they'll be taken off at half time tomorrow.
Well, Josh and Russell are both off the extended bench, so it'll be interesting to see if either of them are actually there at the game.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I can't even remember whose home game it is tomorrow, but there'll be a few South Sydney fans or even maybe Tigers fans that want to give them a piece of their mind. So they're going to have thick skin there tomorrow night, sitting in the cold on the bench. And not easy this year because they obviously want to play. They were bought to play as big-name players. There's no reserve grade, so there's I don't want to feel like I'm just slating them, everything. But, yeah, I'd be surprised if they weren't there tomorrow watching.
Yeah. Let's hope Russell's not blowing kisses to any of the fans that are sledging him.
Yeah.
All right. On a much more positive note, and looking forward rather than us both looking back, the POM has given us an update on the West Tigers forum, and it appears probably two of the worst kept secrets in rugby league. James Tamou and Josh Addo-Carr, they appear pretty certain to be wearing West Tigers colours next year by the look of it.
It's exciting, Joel. I sort of expected maybe Addo-Carr, and I didn't think we'd maybe have the funds to get both of them without clarity around some of the other senior guys and whether they're going to move on. But, without putting too much pressure on the guy on the forum, but he doesn't tend to get too much wrong there. I mean, the Addo-Carr stuff has been heavily in the papers. I think that was always looks about an 80-10, 90-20, pretty confident there, and even saw some quotes from Josh Addo-Carr where he said, excited that club's moving in the right direction. He talked about centre of excellence, and we know his history at the club. But it just makes sense to me, Joel. I was sort of toing and froing with Tamou, but then I thought, no, like premiership winner, leadership, experienced, and both those guys currently at teams that are running first and second, which is the exact mistake we made in our last recruitment. We went and recruited guys who were coming 12th, 11th, Russell, Packer, Reynolds, Madaleno, they were all coming for clubs that were losing. Yeah. These guys have won premierships in the last 4 or 5 years. They're at the top of the table. They provide leadership. I don't think Tamou is going to be a world beater, but I think he's a leader. His stats are good this year. I think he's had 13 of the 17 games. He's run for over 130 metres, which is really consistent for a prop. He doesn't make many errors, doesn't give penalties away. The big question is going to be Addo-Carr and where he plays, Joel. That's the one I can't quite decide on yet, but I am willing to back him. I think it would be a great signing if it's done and dusted.
Yeah. I think that he brings a marketability, and I think you're right about Tamou. I mean, obviously everybody's going, well, he's a bit on the old side, but he's been consistent. He has been. I went back and looked at his records, and he plays 20 games a season every year. Like he's very, very consistent. Touch wood, that obviously continues. But I think he's well spoken. I think he's a leader. I think that he's got captaincy experience. I think he's what we're missing, because so many times this year we've said we just have that lack of a leader. And if James can come in with the right attitude, he could leave a lasting legacy and just be the guy that helps us sort of turn the ship around in certain areas.
And if it's right, rumoured 2 years, which I think is the right time frame, Joel. You know, 4 years, we've seen they're a disaster for players that are 30, 31, but it keeps him motivated. And if he performs well, he might get another year or two. And I think they'd both be in the running to be the captain next year. I can't see any clear standouts. I don't want Moses as captain next year. Tamou would probably be the favourite, but I wouldn't rule out someone like Addo-Carr. I'm really impressed by the way he's just developed, not only just as a player, but I think just as a leader at Melbourne. I think he's a just competitor. He all the little moments in the game. Madge mentioned today that he's tidied up, and they'd be two really, really good signings if we can nail them down. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, well, and a good sign of where the club's at is that Tamou, is hopefully a 2-year deal, and Josh Addo-Carr is a 4-year deal. And you want to be signing the best winger in the game, who's 26 years old. You're going to get the best 4 years out of him of his career. So a 4-year contract, perfect.
Yeah, and it looks like, although you never really know with the media reports, that they're not going to pay him fullback money, because I think Tigers fans were a bit worried about whether you pay, 700,000 or 800,000. We probably can't afford that at the moment. But that's maybe, Joel, where you could find the perfect scenario for a third party, where you could pay him 500 under the salary cap, and I don't know if you're allowed to pay him an extra 100 or 120 with a third party. Would that be a perfect player to fulfill that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think he certainly is. And, it's great too, because it's a feel-good story, although obviously we don't have the confirmation at this stage, but it's just great to see a player leave who obviously does care about the club, and who made such a big impact, and who went on to bigger and better things, but is coming back just as good a player as, like he's not like he's on the other side of 30, but coming back to play football for us. Yeah.
He's in his prime. He's in his absolute prime, and I think he's motivated. I saw Bellamy, they asked him today, could he play fullback, and he was fairly positive. He's obviously not going to say no, but it's exciting. He's just he's got that tiger in him. I think it always, even guys like Tedesco and stuff, Joel, I think deep down it would always mean more to them to either win a competition here than it would elsewhere. And you saw with Benji and them, he'd come back, and Robbie. So it would be nice, because like you said, he's nowhere near over the hill. He's in the absolute prime. I think he's only just turned 25.
Yeah, 26. I think. Yeah.
It's been a while since we've had representative players. I don't count Moses as a rep player. I know he played a couple of games off the bench for Queensland, but we need to get to the next level. We need rep quality players, and Josh is certainly one of them, and will be for the next few years.
There's a bit more news from the POM. Sam McIntyre, which I think everybody was hoping. We've been big fan of Sam's. He just seems to be going from strength to strength. He's set to re-sign. Apparently, he's one we've got to keep.
Yeah, he's done well off the bench. His tackling's been good, and he's run with aggression. His stats haven't jumped off the page, but he hasn't been playing huge minutes.
Yeah.
He's a player that's, like I said last week, we want to identify players that are on the upward curve or got improvement in them and keep them. And we want to get rid of the players that have got no improvement in them. So that would fit the bill. And just on Elijah Taylor, like he hasn't been my favourite player, but I like his professionalism. I saw him during the week, and he was fully endorsing Madge as a coach and a leader, even though the fact, Joel, that he looks like he's going to be released at the end of the year, and that's an example of leadership for me, as opposed to what Packer and Reynolds did on the weekend.
Yeah, one of my favourite players from the modern era of West Tigers, for sure. Not necessarily for his attacking prowess, but for his attitude, for the way that he speaks, for the way that he carries himself, and his defensive efforts. He always gave his best for the club, and as much as we need to move on, it's kind of sad to see him not going to be there. The funny thing is that even though he's only been there 6 years, I feel with a heavier heart seeing Elijah leave than I do Benji or Chris Lawrence, which is an interesting thing within myself.
Okay. Yeah, that is interesting. It's a bit weird with Benji because it's been such a long goodbye, and he's already left once, and it was sort of, that final 2018 was built up as his final year, and it's just gone on and on, a bit like the Robbie thing. You always get tired of it in a way. But yeah, I just think, there's probably not going to be a contract for him, but he's the sort of guy that, they said to me they're going to have him for a year because we've got no one else, and they get rid of a couple of the other guys on big money, then it's not going to be the worst thing in the world, is it? Because he does, every time he goes on the field, he puts in Elijah Taylor, and he's never had a bad word said about him as far as I know off the field. Yeah,
exactly. Yep. A couple of other names that were mentioned as potential signings by the Pom. He sounded pretty confident about it. A couple that I was quite interested in, this one in particular, Jack Hetherington. I think Jack would be a great addition. We are missing a little bit of firepower up front, but also Charlie Staines, who a lot of people have got raps on, very fast young player. And Tukumia Simpkins. I think that's how you pronounce it. Tukumia Simpkins. 6'4" Kiwi, playing for the Cowboys. He was a development player up there with the Cowboys. Back rower. Looks to be a good prospect. If we could add those three. Stefano, James Tamou, Josh Addo-Carr. I think we're starting to look pretty good. Get some fitness in the legs of Sean Bloor. Zane Musgrove back on the field. I think the stocks are starting to look a little bit healthier for 2021.
Yeah, well, it's a good place to go looking, the Penrith Junior Nursery, and I think Charlie Staines has scored tries on his, I don't know how many games he's played, but he looks exciting player. That backline starts to look, pretty red hot if you can get Addo-Carr with Nofaluma and BJ and, Adam Dewey firing. I don't think he's been fully fit this year. Forward pack's going to have more depth to it. I guess the big question, Joel, is probably, the spine, the 6, 7, 9. Brooksy's probably going to be here. Do we need a partner for him? And who's going to be the number one hooker? So still those key positions I have question marks, but, you get Tamou and Addo-Carr in and maybe one more. Definitely will be exciting because we need to get this club to the next level. And I know Madge says deep down he has a lot of belief, but I think he knows he needs more cattle. He needs more cattle, better cattle.
Yeah. Yes, it's felt like that at times, looking back through this year. That you could see some glimpses, but you could also see that like a jockey that's flogging a horse that's six horses off the lead.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, sometimes you run your race and you run your best, and you're never going to win. And we're never going to win this competition this year. There's a ceiling to us at the moment, but you put in a couple other guys and pieces, and things can turn around, because I don't think it's all doom and gloom. It's still hoping and praying for getting some of those big contracts off the books, but yeah, we'll wait and see.
You mentioned Henry Perinara. I think last time I looked it up, we had about a 30% win record with Henry. For the Souths game, your second favourite referee, Ben Cummins.
I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I was actually scrolling down the forum, and they had the team list, the Tigers team list, and there were a few comments, and there was a few, hopeful, we think we can get him. And then someone said, who's the referee? And then it was confirmed, Cummins and Perinara. And there was about 8 posts under that saying, well, we're no hope. And that's usually just fans blowing off steam. But Ben Cummins, I just don't like his style of refereeing. He's arrogant. He tends to pick one side throughout the game. And, Well, I'd like to know the breakdown of penalties and stats with him, because he reffed that last game at Leichhardt last year. I thought he was horrible. I know he got beaten by Cronulla, but we just don't seem to have anyone to stand up to him. That's what I don't like about Moses as a leader. If we're getting flogged in a penalty count or there's a challenge, we just seem to just get on with the game and cop it. But yeah, that's a nasty duo, Joel. Ben Cummins and Henry Perenara. So
yeah, plenty of vocal South fans, no doubt, booing everything, including everything. They'd boo the national anthem, South fans.
oh, good on. I'd do the national anthem too if it meant it got a penalty, Joel.
All right, let's leave it there, Eddie. I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about next week. Hopefully, West Tigers still in the news, but for a little bit more positive, a little bit more sort of, less. What's the word?
Mayhem or something, chaos.
Mayhem. Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
Well, hopefully we can.
Controversy. That's the word. Yep.
Yeah. Hopefully we can talk about confirmed signings and another win. That'd be the perfect weekend.
It would be. All right. Take it easy, Eddie.
See you, John.